Have you ever carried something quietly for so long that you started believing carrying it alone was just part of being strong? Maybe you showed up, you still work, you still provide, and you still help. Yet you constantly find yourself still saying, I'm fine. Underneath all of it, there are these things you don't always know how to say out loud, right? The pressure, the fear, the exhaustion, the responsibility, the emotion you're trying to sort through before they just spill out everywhere. Maybe somewhere along the way, silence started feeling safer than honesty. This week on Shadows, I want to reflect on the tactic of isolation. Not the kind of isolation where someone just disappears completely, but the kind where you can be present in the room and still be carrying that weight alone. Welcome back to From Hollow to Holy. I'm Justin, and this is Shadows, a series where I'm reflecting on the patterns, distractions, fears, and tactics that quietly pull us away from peace, truth, purpose, and ultimately from God. In this episode, I want to talk about isolation. And the question I keep coming back to is this: when did carrying it alone start feeling like strength? When I used to think about isolation, I usually thought about someone withdrawing completely, someone just disappearing, cutting everyone off, physically removing themselves from everyone else around them. But really starting to realize isolation can be much quieter than that. Sometimes isolation looks like still being in the room, still going to work, answering messages, helping people. You're still showing up for your family, still doing just what needs to be done. But emotionally, you're somewhere else. You're checked out, you're quiet, you're irritated. You're carrying something inside, but you're not letting anyone close enough to actually see that weight. And I think that's the kind of isolation that can be really hard to recognize because from the outside, it just looks like everything's fine. You're functioning, you're moving, you're doing the things that need done. But inside, it's pressure, fear, exhaustion, anger, sadness, or disappointment that you just don't know how to explain. For me, that's often where isolation starts. Not because I'm trying to hurt anyone, because I'm not. And it's not because I don't care, but because I'm trying to control what comes out of my mouth. One of the reasons I go quiet is just because of that. I don't always trust what I'm feeling in that same moment. Sometimes I know that if I speak too quick, I'm going to speak out of clarity that's not really clarity. I'm going to speak from anger or frustration, exhaustion, maybe even fear. And that's where this gets complicated because sometimes staying quiet for a minute is wisdom. Sometimes pausing before speaking, that's the right thing to do. And sometimes processing it internally first keeps us from saying things we don't mean. Saying something in a way that makes the situation worse. And I know for me, I don't like word vomiting raw emotion. I don't like just dumping everything out before I've had any time to just understand what I'm actually feeling. Part of that's because, I've been burned in the past when I've shared too much too quick. And part of it's because I just know myself. And I know that when I'm angry, I don't always see things clearly. Sometimes when I say I'm fine, what I really mean is I'm not ready to talk. Or I'm still sorting through this. Sometimes it's just I need a minute before I say something the wrong way. And I don't really think that's always bad. There's wisdom in that. But that's where that shadow quietly shows up. It starts as self control, then slowly becomes isolation if I never come back and actually let someone in. See, that sometimes the I'm fine is just a pause. But then again, sometimes the I'm fine becomes a hiding place. And I think that's one of Satan's tactics that he uses. You know, he takes something that may have started as wisdom and slowly twists it into distance. And that's where I have to be honest. There are times when I think I'm protecting people around me or just myself by just not saying what I'm carrying. I don't want to dump any more stress onto my wife, and I don't want to dump any more pressure onto my kids. I don't want anything to feel heavier than they already do because in our day and age, it feels heavy. Stress is real, and the pressure to be on top of your game has never been higher. But still, I don't want to be misunderstood. So I keep it inside. I process it. I work through it internally, and I try to be strong. But sometimes I'm not actually protecting those people. What I'm really doing is just keeping them outside of that wall. And for me, isolation often looks like going quiet. It does look like irritability. It looks like emotionally just checking out. I can be physically present with my family, but just completely and unequivocally not available emotionally. And Rachel is typically the one who usually sees this weight first. It'll take a while before it shows up. I've done a really good job of being able to hide things, especially when it comes to my emotions. But it eventually does. Maybe not as a clear conversation, maybe not as me saying, here's what I'm feeling. Sometimes it just shows up because I've distanced myself, or I'm a little more frustrated than I was. Maybe it's me being short with everybody, not giving full explanations or answers, or I'm just withdrawn. They'll be telling me something and my mind's just gone, not there. And that's really hard to admit because I don't want to create distance, and I typically don't hide anything. I love to just wear my heart on my sleeve, but I've been burned. So when it comes to my emotions, I do. And I'm learning that the people closest to me often feel that weight of what I refuse just to name. And they may not know what it is. And I may not know what it is. And they don't know where it's coming from a lot of the time, and neither do I. But they can feel that there's pressure there. And that's one of the most painful things about isolation, you know? I think that we're carrying it alone, so just nobody has to know or nobody's gonna know. But really what's happening is the people we love still feel it. They just don't know what or how to call it out. And part of isolation comes from the fear of what, if I'm honest about the weight, it may just expose some form of weakness in me. And once that weakness becomes exposed, there's this fear that it can be used against me. And that may not always be fair, and it may not be what anyone intends. It's just something that I've carried over my life, and so I'm learning to work through it. Somewhere along the way, I learned to treat vulnerability like evidence that could be used against me. So instead of saying what I'm actually really carrying, I just hold it back. I try to work it out first in my own head. I try to make it cleaner or safer or more presentable to the room. And again, there's wisdom in being careful with what and who we trust. Not everybody has earned access to our deepest struggles, and not everyone is safe with our rawest emotions. But there is also a difference between discernment and isolation. You know, discernment says be careful who you trust. Then there's isolation that says trust no one. I mean, think about it. How many of you out there have told yourself that? Trust no one. And we hear it all the time on the media or on the news. Yet, discernment will tell you use wisdom, while isolation will tell you just to carry it alone. bottle it up. And that's the tactic, you know? Satan convinces us that vulnerability is dangerous, that silence is strength, and that carrying that weight alone is so much more safe than letting God or anyone else see it. And another way isolation shows up for me is the way I think about responsibility, you know, being a husband or a father, a provider, trying to stay spiritually grounded, trying to lead well, or maybe trying to be someone my family can count on. At times, those things all blend together in my mind because I don't want to fail in any one of those areas. I want to be steady. I want to provide and be strong. I want to protect my family from my own stress while still being present and spiritually anchored. But at times, that pressure to be steady often turns into pressure to be silent. And silence can start to feel noble. Like, you know what? I'll just carry this. I can handle it. I'll just keep moving because I have to. And I don't need to say anything to anyone. I don't want to make it anybody else's problem because it's nobody else's problem. It's my problem. But sometimes when we carry it alone, it doesn't protect the family. It just keeps them from knowing where we really are. And I think a lot of us understand that pressure and that mindset. Maybe not in the exact way. Maybe you're not the same as me, but I'll bet that you know what it feels like to be that person everyone assumes to be okay because you keep showing up. Maybe you know what it feels like to be tired, but still be responsible, worried, but still needed, struggling, but still functioning. And somewhere in all of that, your I'm fine becomes the easiest thing to say, even when it's fully not true. See, that same pattern can show up in my relationship with God. Sometimes I hesitate to bring that weight to Him, not because I don't believe in prayer or that I don't believe He cares, because I know that He cares. And I do believe in prayer. But mostly because part of me feels like what I'm carrying either just simply isn't important enough or I should have already figured it out by now. I feel like I've already failed people, like my family or myself. And that can be hard just to bring some burden of it to God. It can feel repetitive. It can be embarrassing. Or maybe I think it's small or messy. Like I should have just already outgrown it. So instead of praying honestly and earnestly, I try to clean it up first. I try to fix it before I bring it to him. Or maybe it's me just making it more presentable. But even that is still isolation. It's spiritual isolation. And I'll bet that somewhere along the way, you may have felt that too. Maybe you have avoided prayer, not because you stopped believing in God, but because you were embarrassed to still be bringing that same weight. Maybe you thought, this should still not bother me. I should be stronger by now. Maybe I should just have more faith in this, right? Or my favorite one is this probably isn't important enough to bring to God. But I don't think Christ speaks that way, right? If we think about it, in Matthew chapter 11, Christ says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That phrase matters a lot to me. All ye that labor and are of heavy laden. You know what he doesn't say? Come unto me when you can explain the burden perfectly. Or come unto me when you're done being emotional about it. Or come unto me when the burden is impressive enough that I can give it to you. No, none of them. He simply says, come unto me. And that verse challenges me because my instinct is often just to carry it out first myself, to clean it up, to process it, to make sure it's not too messy before I bring it to God. But Christ does not invite only the perfectly composed. He invites the weary, and he invites the heavy laden. He invites the ones who are tired from carrying what they were never meant to carry alone. Maybe that's the truth isolation tries to hide from us. You know, isolation's like, you have to carry this by yourself, while Christ is saying, come unto me. When I think about Christ seeing me carry things alone, you know what I often remember and think about? I think about the old footprints in the sand story. The idea is that someone looks back over their life and they notice that during the hardest parts, there were only one set of footprints in the sand. And they wonder, Christ, why did you leave me? But the answer is that he didn't leave. Those were the moments that he was the one carrying them. And that image has stayed with me for as long as I can remember. Because sometimes I am in the middle of carrying something heavy. And I'll be honest, it does feel like I'm alone. It feels like there's only one set of footprints in the sand. And I think what I'm missing is the way that Christ has already been carrying me. You know, maybe he has carried me through things I didn't even recognize. I know I've seen it before when I look back on my past. Maybe he's closer than I realized. And maybe he's not waiting for me to just completely collapse before he starts to help me carry that weight and he starts carrying the weight. He's inviting me to stop pretending that I was meant to carry it alone in the very first place. So, this is where the episode turns back to all of us. What are you carrying that you've convinced yourself no one else needs to know about? Where has your I'm fine become a wall? Have you confused silence with strength? Maybe there's something you haven't brought to God because it feels too small or messy, too repetitive, or maybe it's just too embarrassing. Think to yourself, who's that one safe person who could see a little more of that weight? Now, I do want to be clear. I'm not saying that we should word vomit every emotion onto everyone or anyone around us. That's not what I'm saying here. There's wisdom in timing and in self control, and there's wisdom in processing before speaking. But there's also danger in never speaking at all. Processing things, that's healthy, but hiding will eventually make us lonely. And maybe strength is not pretending the weight is light. Maybe strength is finally being honest about how heavy it's become. No, remember, isolation says carry it alone. Don't say it out loud. No one's going to understand you. If they see the weakness, they're going to use it against you. And if you admit the weight, you're going to be a failure. But Christ says the opposite. Come unto me. Not after you've fixed it, not after you've cleaned it up or any portion of it, not even after you've proven that you're strong enough to be carrying it. He says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden. And that is what I'm trying to learn. I'm learning that honesty does not have to mean saying everything to everyone. It doesn't mean handing your heart to people who haven't earned that trust. But it does mean refusing to let isolation become the place where burdens go to grow heavier. It means letting God see the real weight, letting the right people see enough of the truth to love you well. It means realizing that strength is not always silence. And sometimes strength is saying, I'm not okay yet. I'm still sorting through this. I need a minute. I need help, or I need prayer, or I need you to know where I really am. So this week, maybe the question is simple. Where have I confused carrying it alone with strength? Where have I used the I'm fine as a wall? And what would it look like to bring that weight to Christ instead of carrying it by myself? Because maybe isolation is one of the quieter tactics that Satan uses. Christ's invitation, still louder. Come unto me, he says. You were never asked to carry it alone. If this episode made you think of someone who always seems strong, someone who always says they're fine, or someone who may be carrying more than they let people see, maybe share it with them. Not because this conversation fixes everything, but because sometimes people need to be reminded they were never asked to carry it alone. As always, keep moving forward, keep your eyes on Christ, and until next time, this is Justin. Thank you for listening to From Hollow to Holy.